Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because today we are going to continue with our fall vibes discussion that we had yesterday to talk about a book that actually was recommended in the fall vibes fantasy book recommendations episode, and that is World War Z, A Oral History of the Zombie War by Max Brooks.
We are in all-out spooky mode here on Friends Talking Fantasy, and what better way to stick with the theme than get into some good old-fashioned zombie novel action. So, Charles, I haven't read this one. I know that you said you just finished the audiobook of this one today, so you are fresh. You are not a rotting zombie corpse. You are as fresh as they come.
Yep, I've only just been bitten, and I'm like, it's fine, guys, it's fine. He didn't really get me, I'm good. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
The classic, like in the zombie movie, there's always the person, a zombie movie show, the person who got bit, and they're like hiding it. And
yes.
Then, you are that person right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure no one knows. They were like, ooh, that was a close one. And you're like, yep, that was really close.
Exactly. Like, oh, wow, they just missed me.
That would have been bad, but luckily we're all okay. And then the camera pans to me, and I lift up the sleeve and then put the sleeve quickly back down. That's always it. So that's me right now. And guess what, guys? You get to benefit from that because this will be a spoiler-free and focused discussion on the book World War Z by Max Brooks. We're going to dive into some of the themes, a little bit about the book, the genre, all that, without giving away any of the plot. Isn't that right, Dylan?
That's exactly right, Charles. And I'm excited because this is on my TBR, so we'll see if I come away from this one ready to dive into it as soon as I can, because it's spooky season. Halloween's going to be coming before we know it. I mean, by the time we're releasing this, we're going to be like 3 days away from Halloween. So this is a great Halloween app. Absolutely. Now is the time. And I was interested too. This all started from our, we have an Audible problem episode where we were trying to spend credits. And I was considering spending a credit on this, and I believe you had recommended it because it's got such a wide cast for the audiobook. And I didn't get it at the time because it was available at the library. So the compromise was I would, reserve it in the library and then, spend my credits on something else. And now all these weeks later, my hold in the library, it finally became available. And so it's a short audiobook. It's about 8 hours at the full length. And so it really, it went by rather fast. I only think it took me like a week of my commute at like 1.5x or 2x speed to kind of get through. So, it's a short read, but before I get too deep into it, I guess we should explain a little bit about what it is. World War Z, fantastic title, by the way. Really, really catchy. And it's by Max Brooks. And Dylan, did you know that Max Brooks is the son of Mel Brooks? I did not know that.
I did not know this either until I decided, I'm going to talk about this on the show. I may as well do a little bit of research in my 10 minutes before coming on the air. And my quick cursory review into Max Brooks was, he is the son of Mel Brooks. Ooh. And I guess when your dad is like a legendary satirist and comedian, you kind of feel compelled to go the other way and write like a very serious zombie apocalyptic horror novel, right? So
I guess so. Charles, did you know that Mel Brooks is my half-second cousin-in-law.
Half second cousin-in-law? So what does that make Max Brooks? Your
Max
half
Brooks is
second
then third,
nephew-in-law? I don't
half-third
know.
cousin-in-law, I think.
I have I have no idea, but I did not know that. I did not. So I'm friends with the second cousin.
Yeah. So
half
just to
removed.
clarify, the half. Basically, my uncle's longtime. So there's really no relation. My uncle's longtime partner. I mean, we're talking like almost my whole life. They've been together, but just did not marry. So I consider like her my aunt, and I consider her kid my cousins, but technically there is no relation there, so I call half cousin. That's where I got that from. But the rest is true because it is yeah. So that would make them so I think it's their is it their cousin through marriage or something like that, or second cousin through marriage, something like that. So he was at a family reunion on like their side of family. Yeah.
Well,
and maybe Max was too.
Maybe he was. I didn't realize you were so close to zombie royalty this whole time.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah. And you haven't even read the book, and I have. This is ridiculous. But we're very happy Charles. For you.
We're still learning new things about each other.
That's how you keep the spark alive, man. You know, this is great. And people could say like that's proof that I wasn't in it for the Mel Brooks connection or the Max Brooks connection, you know. It's genuine friendship. So this is exciting. I'm still reeling from the news, but I'm going to try and power forwards about World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war. I guess so. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to find out like the most serious, like alternate history / zombie story would come from the son of someone who writes parodies of things famously. So it's just kind of funny to make that connection. The back of the book is described as we survived the zombie apocalypse, but how many of us are still haunted by that terrible time? We've defeated the living dead, but at what cost? Told in the haunting and riveting voices of the men and women who witnessed the horror firsthand, World War Z is the only record of the pandemic. The zombie war came unthinkably close to eradicating humanity. And Max Brooks, driven by his urgency of preserving the acid-etched first-hand experiences of the survivors, travels across the United States of America and throughout the world, from decimated cities that once teemed with upwards of 30 million souls to the most remote and inhospitable areas of the planet. He recorded the testimony of men, women, and sometimes children who came face-to-face with the living, or at least the undead, hell of that dreadful time. World War Z is the result. Never before have we had access to document that so powerfully conveys the depth of fear and horror, and also the ineradicable spirit of the resistance that gripped human society through the plague years. So, there you go. Quite a big splash. It is told very much, it takes itself very seriously like a drama. Like if someone was going around the world interviewing people about their experiences in World War II, it was like, oh, I was a soldier, I was a child, I was a doctor, and here was what I experienced about World War II. Or, you know, I was in an internment camp and survived. He gets that diverse of perspectives, and he takes it very seriously. To me, it's more in the genre of not as much horror as it is like alternative history. Like it kind of reminds me of something like, oh gosh, what's that book by Philip K. Dick that became that Amazon show? Where if the Axis powers won World War II.
Oh, geez. High Tower, like the man.
Yes, the man in the high castle.
The high tower.
The man in the high castle. Yep. So it kind of reminds me of that, where it's like, let's picture something really, you know, scary and dramatic happening, and then let's see how people would live in a world after that has happened. And so that's the most interesting thing about this. Like, to me, it's like the cover is very like intense, and it's got blood smear in the shape of a Z, and it's like World War Z. And then it's like my name is so and so. I'm a journalist. I'm going around and talking to people. Like the zombie thing has already been solved and is over by the time this book takes place. And it's literally the same journalist going around interviewing people. And what was interesting about the audiobook format was that it really was like he was going and recording somebody recounting their story. And every person was a different voice actor. So even though this audiobook was only 8 hours long, it has a crazy long cast, including people like Mark Hamill, Dylan, as one of the
Wow.
voice actors. Luke Skywalker, any relation to him at all in your family line?
Not that I know of, but I can always
Maybe
get
you
one of
have
those
some third or
23 and
fourth
me.
cousins.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
And then he's
I'm
got
open to it. I'm open to it.
yeah, that will. I'm rooting for you on that one because that would be cool.
So
I'm a big Star Wars fan.
can can I state, Charles?
Hmm.
You mentioned in describing the plot of the book, there's a like the journalist in the book who is collecting this information is also Max Brooks. So like Max Brooks is writing a book about Max Brooks.
So no, I don't think Max Brooks. I don't think the character was named Max Brooks. I believe the character had a different name. I'm forgetting. I
I
believe it's.
think you're I don't know. On Wikipedia too, it says I was looking it up. Does it?
Oh
It
yeah.
says by a fictionalized version of the author Max Brooks,
Oh, interesting.
author
Maybe
of
it
the
is.
Zombie Survivor.
I forget. It says he plays such a backseat from the beginning that I don't even remember the
Yeah.
guy's name. But interestingly enough, Max Brooks does lend his voice to the character in the audiobook. So that's another interesting piece. But I mean, this cast has got so many different people in it, like Martin Scorsese, Alfred Molina from Spider-Man, the Walking Dead creator, Frank Darabont. He's got Nathan Fillion. He's got Simon
Ooh.
Pegg. Like, I'm telling you, this cast is absolutely insane.
Well,
And
when Mel Brooks is your
I guess so.
dad, you probably have a few
I was like,
in the industry.
I was like, this story is good, but like Brad Pitt movie and this insane cast of characters. I was like, oh, it makes sense now. He's got the Hollywood connect. I was like, I mean, the book is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy for its success, but I just couldn't get all the way there into how this kind of broke through into Hollywood. You may also remember, I don't know if you've ever seen the book, The Zombie Survival Guide. You may recognize the cover. I recognized the cover. I had never read it, but it was a pretty popular book in the early 2000s. I remember seeing it. So that was Max Brooks's first book. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Max Brooks's first book. Ooh. And World War Z was the follow-up. So it's really interesting. It's almost like an anthology of short stories. It is structured kind of chronologically, so he does, each collection of short stories, which is a different person's experience, are kind of grouped into these different book chapters, I guess you could call it. I'm trying to look up the name of all the chapters. Here we go. So there's 8 chapters, and each have a handful of short stories in them. Some of them are very short, like a couple minutes, and some of them are like 40 minutes plus. And it's called Warnings, Blame, The Great Panic, Turning the Tide, Homefront USA, Around the World and Above, Total War, and Goodbyes. So you can see it kind of takes you through like the beginning of the war to like the aftermath. And I mentioned earlier all the different perspectives. It's really interesting to see all these different voices that he chose to take. Like the first one is a doctor in China, and then he goes to this like little girl who in America, whose family like they brought her, they like decided to leave their home and drive, and her experience of like driving and running into people and people turning to violence and running out of gas and having to hunt for food and people starving and like all that stuff. And then it will do like a soldier who fought the first battle of a giant wave of zombies, and so it's interesting to get that perspective. But the zombies, there's never a scene where like someone is presently like scared of being attacked by a zombie. It's just people recounting their experiences. So it's kind of interesting for like, yes, this is a zombie book, but the zombies are very much on the back seat, and it's really more of this like speculative fiction, I would say, more than anything else.
That's interesting, Charles. I'm looking at the Amazon page for this book, and it's funny. A lot of the reviews are like, "Will spook you for real," the New York Times book review, and like, "This infectious and compelling book will have nervous readers watching the streets for zombies." Recommended, Library Journal. So it's like these ways of reviewing it. A lot of people are like painting it as though it is this like, oh geez, this horror novel that's going to have you really scared. So I'm trying to place it in my mind of like, okay, why are they saying that? Is it like, is there a component of the book being so like realistically handled? Whereas like that makes it really scary, like makes it feel like something that could actually happen.
I would say so. I think that to me, like the horror elements come from how seriously Max Brooks takes this scenario. Like, what if there was a zombie outbreak? Like, how would that be handled at a macroeconomic level? And then how would those macroeconomic changes affect individuals in different parts of the world in different positions? So he takes it very, very seriously, and it takes place in like I don't know the exact setting of the book, but you would call it present day, right? Like I would say it took place in the early 21st century, is what they're kind of saying. So it's very modern, and it's kind of funny. This was written in 2006 was when this was published, and to read it now, like 4 years after a massive pandemic, it's kind of interesting to see the things that he's touched on in terms of like people, this stemmed from Africa, right? And so everyone called the virus African rabies, and there was prejudice around that, right? Which is not too different from like the Wuhan flu, it's just crazy. Yeah. And then you have, fake news, and then you have people overreacting, underreacting, like they had a placebo vaccine that was giving people false senses of securities. Like all of these things were happening, and that is kind of the terrifying part. It's like to watch your society like crumble. And when you know how close we came to a lot of that stuff with the pandemic as well, you're like, this is kind of one of those things that to imagine a world where like millions of zombies are like just rushing towns and upending society completely. It is not. No one had a good time. It seemed very, 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 very scary. And the way that these, like the characters are written, they're all such different perspectives, and they're all really detailed. And you're kind of like, you feel yourself being like, okay, what happens next? But then the story ends and you have to move to the next story. And you're like, hey, I was like, that was just getting started for me, So it was interesting to watch that play out. And then the voice actors, you've got these Hollywood actors giving it 110% as well. So you're like, wow, this is like, he did a really good job of using the realism of modern society and politics to like just use this idea of a zombie outbreak as the catalyst for all of these political, social fallouts, essentially. I'd say some of the, you get those common themes that are in every zombie story, like survivalism and fear and uncertainty and stuff like that. But you also, what we got on top of that was kind of the politics at play and the cynicism and also just people like being like trying to find meaning in all of it as well. So I don't know, it was very interesting. And it gets into, even goes as far as to go into like fossil fuels and oil reserves and the environment. So it covers everything. But there are moments, some of the characters have more like horrifying stories of just trying to survive, and those are more kind of what we have traditionally seen in the zombie genre. But it also can also take the role of a doctor or a soldier who has a different look on it. They're looking at it more analytically. How do we solve this political problem of a zombie outbreak? I think there was one where there's like a house. The guy was hired security for a guy in California who tricked out his house and invited celebrities to like bunker at his house, and they would film it. And then he was telling the story of when it was like getting overrun by zombies. It was just like really interesting stuff going on. So, and so there's like the horror elements of like, imagine living in California and like there's so many zombies, and these are the fast zombies too. So they're like running and scaling the wall and stuff, and you're just trying to survive. Meanwhile, you've got people like filming it for reality TV or false news or whatever. So it's kind of that combination, like why didn't they just evacuate kind of a thing, So it's got a little bit of both.
The most horrifying part of that, Charles, is living in California. Am I right with that cost of living? Yeah, Charles?
You're just saying that because of how the the MLB's going for you as the Mets fan.
oh, that one hurt. That would hurt. The day after the Mets are eliminated from the postseason is when we're recording, for the record, and Charles goes right to the jugular. But,
well, I thought that was where the Cali hate was coming from. I'm with you. I was rooting for that.
I mean, maybe subconsciously. I mean, that's the scene. Los Angeles is the scene of the Mets' demise. So
yes,
yes, but that hurt, Charles. I have to regroup. But I thought this was a safe place. I thought on a fantasy podcast, but with someone who, like,
to be fair, I didn't know they were eliminated. I did not know.
Okay.
Had I had known that they were out, I knew they lost, but I didn't know that meant they were out. They play like 700 games in baseball. I thought maybe like, so they lost this one, but they're going to play like 10 more. Had I had known they were just eliminated, I probably wouldn't have said it. I wouldn't have gone. Okay. So I'm sorry. But in my defense, I genuinely didn't know. Because I don't, like you said, I don't know anything about baseball.
That's all right. I forgive you.
I just know whatever headlines I grabbed from scrolling, Reddit 2 days ago is kind of my source of news.
Well,
but
yeah, so they probably had lost a game when you read it, but not been eliminated yet.
Yeah, and they were talking about this Japanese pitcher / batter who was doing really well, and so I was like, oh, that was
Shohei Ohtani. Yeah, he's actually he's recovering from an injury that made him unable to pitch this year. But yeah, he normally pitches and hits, but he's just hitting, and even with just hitting, he's gonna win MVP this year for the National League. But anyway,
crazy,
which is wild.
Yeah.
But
so that was the last piece of news that I heard. Just like, oh, that guy's kicking the Mets' butts.
he thoroughly kicked our butts and kicked us out of the playoffs. But anyway, Charles, let's regroup here.
Yeah,
something that struck me is that much like Shohei Ohtani struck a leadoff home run in game. What was it, 5-4, something like that. But was this idea of the book was written in 2007, I think it was
6,
and then it's just like 6. Okay, it's wild because it sounds like something that like almost would have come out when like pandemic books suddenly became in vogue because everyone was like in the middle of the pandemic with probably lots of time to write for many people who are writers, and then like writing all these pandemic books because that was foremost on their mind. But it's like when you describe the things that people are dealing with in the book, it's almost like seems like it would be informed by our actual experience with the pandemic, but actually no, it came way before, which is pretty wild. Like he was prescient, it sounds like, in a lot of ways, especially with what you described around like how racism started playing a role and how it'd get politicized and like all of that kind of stuff. So I find that very interesting, thinking about it as something that predated the pandemic. I also just, it makes me think, right at the start of the pandemic, like I remember everyone was like clearing out their offices. Like we were supposed to go to the school to get all our crap out of our offices, and I remember going there and there's just literally no one on the campus within anywhere that I could see on like a weekday at Colorado State University, giant state university. Like, you know
Crazy,
what I'm saying?
right?
It's like, I was like, this, I honestly thought in that moment, I was like, this is probably what a zombie apocalypse would feel like, minus the fact that I have no fear that I'm going to get attacked by zombies right now. But I was like, this is probably what that feels. I mean, that's just me being a speculative fiction reader that my brain even went there. But yeah, it's really interesting.
And it's one of those things where it was a shared experience across the whole world, too. So that's the other piece that makes it eerily similar. And it's that global perspective that makes this story particularly interesting and so relatable, too. You know, and combine that with the oral history format and the individual style of storytelling. And you've got like a really interesting blend of traits. It's like, okay, zombies, story, oral history, global perspective, storytelling. Like it's a combination that I hadn't really read before. So I think that's what really helps it stand out and maintain its popularity all these years later. And it's a clever story. You know, some stories were stronger than others, and I'll also say, my only criticism of the audiobook is that there's certain characters like that are from places like China or places in Africa and Southern Africa where the voice actor speaks English but puts on a very heavy accent, and you're like, okay, I'm kind of having a harder time following this story. I don't know if we needed that thick accent. I don't know like how much.
And it's like actors that are not at all like from those places.
Some of them
just,
sounded like it. I was
accent.
like, ooh, this person is definitely not Chinese, or is Chinese, but maybe he doesn't have a Chinese accent usually. You know, I was like kind of suspicious of some of that. And on a couple of them. For the most part, it's fine. But there were a few that were particularly difficult. But for the most part, it was very cool, and the exercise I thought was really unique. And I've listened to a lot of audiobooks, and I've never seen that many voice actors crammed into that short of an audiobook. And so it really helped it stand out and adds to its appeal, I would say. It was adapted into a movie, and we kind of talked about this in the last episode. It's kind of like, even it's funny, the Amazon page says inspired the movie. And I think Max Brooks has said like the only thing they have in common is a good title, you know. So they seem very different. And I haven't seen the movie, I've just seen the trailers, but the trailers I've seen, it's like Brad Pitt in a helicopter on a roof, like holding a family and like shooting a machine gun at like an impossible amount of zombies as the helicopter takes off. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not quite what happens in this. I think they made it more of an action movie, whereas this is a lot of action happens, but it's really a series of short stories. So not quite the same pacing, I would say. So yeah, just to wrap it all up, my final impressions, I really liked that it was, you know, short and thoughtful. I kind of feel like it's something that when people write about zombies and the zombie trope and speculative fiction, it can overstay its welcome. But Max Brooks does a lot of different things and keeps it moving in a way that it was very unique and fresh, and I highly enjoyed it. And for the spooky season, what a great investment, especially if you're a fan of audiobooks. It lends itself really well to the audiobook format to hear these accounts, and it's really well produced. And so I thought it was really nice. If you're someone who's kind of on the fence about the traditional zombie horror story. I think of like even something like The Walking Dead or The Last of Us or something like that, where it's like they take place in a very specific period. It's like right after the outbreak, it's just like max apocalypse. And there's certainly stories that take place in that moment, but a lot of it is before and afterwards. So it's kind of interesting to get away from that, like, ooh, he was bitten, he's hiding the bite, and oh my gosh, like something's wrong, what is it? Dead bodies are coming back to life, just to like get past all of that and really dive into the genre, to me was also unique and interesting. So yeah, that's how, just to wrap it up, that's my kind of spoiler-free take on World War Z.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a good fit for fans of Station 11. I've been thinking as you're going through it, like even though that's not a zombie apocalypse, it's also like a post-pandemic that wiped out, in that case, like 99% of the population or whatever. But is, rather than being in the thick of the pandemic and the action of it, it's more like focused on the aftermath and trying to find meaning and purpose in this new world where it'd be easy to fall into kind of a more survivalist, just get by mentality. So seems like there's some of that that might be a good fit for fans of Station 11.
Absolutely. I think even fans of like sci-fi or fans of history, like, or historical fiction books, speculative fiction books, would enjoy this too, because that's really what this is an exercise in, is like, how would modern politics change over the course of a zombie outbreak,
Charles, you remember the Pillows and Blankets episode of Community in season 3?
Yes.
Yeah, it's it's sort of like a history documentary style of something. In that case, very silly. How similar would you say this audiobook was to that episode of Community?
I'd say they're in the same spirit, but that may have been written more by someone like Mel Brooks, but this is Max Brooks we're talking about. We got the X in there, a little X factor, a little Z factor. This is much more serious. But it's the same spirit. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't get that kind of stuff at the early end of the alphabet with those.
No, you certainly don't.
Like K in Brooks.
Or the L, like Mel, like, come on.
Yeah.
You're going to take Mel seriously? You're going to take Max seriously?
Oh, that X, that is.
This isn't World War L, it's World War Z, man.
American History X, that's a gritty movie.
Oh, yeah. It sure is. So,
okay.
There you go.
I know what I'm getting myself into now.
I think the only thing left to get ourselves into is that sweet, sweet outro music. What do you say, Dylan?
I think that's probably all there's left to do at this point.
Okay, let's get that pump in. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is over on the socials at the FTF podcast on, let's see, that would be Instagram and TikTok, and then the FTF podcast with a number 1 at the end for Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than following us and engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. Just go to the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, click about, click where the stars are. You know how many of those to give us. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can say nice things about us. You can ask me further questions in your review about my complete lack of relation to Mel Brooks that for some reason I think is something worth bragging about. You can also subscribe on both of those platforms and likely on whatever other platform you're listening to us on, but you don't have to do that because just listening is more than enough.
Well said, Dylan. Just listening, so much more than enough. thank you all for listening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.